Hello, everybody, and I'm Donna Andersen, author of lovefraud.com, and I'm here with Dr. Liane Leedom. This is a replay of the show we intended last week. Unfortunately, I had technical difficulties, so I wasn't able to get the broadcast right, but here we are today. So, Dr. Liane Leedom is a psychiatrist and a professor of psychology and counseling at the University of Bridgeport. And so, we're going to talk about her work and also a program that she's developed to help everybody. So, welcome, Dr. Leedom. It's so good to
Oh,
see
thank you
you.
so much.
Okay. And first of all, I wanted to ask you to talk about an experience that you shared with me many years ago. We've actually been working together for about 20 years. And early in our friendship, you told me about your experience with a guy by the name of Rodney Alcala, who turned out to be a serial killer who killed, like, he was convicted of killing five women and may have killed many more. So, what can you tell us about your experience with him?
Well, I think the funniest part of it is how when I was in the early phases of recovery myself from um, the relationship that I had that got me into this, I was up at night because I couldn't sleep. As you know, I think probably a lot of people can relate to that with trauma. You have insomnia. And I was watching CNN and came on, and I really think it must have been Anderson Cooper who said, "Do you know any of these people?" And I look up, and there's my picture. And so people have found that picture. It's not that hard to find. It was taken when I was 17 by this man. And so how did I meet him? He lived on my street.
Oh dear.
And so, the experts tell us that people with severe psychopathy are relatively rare. I don't think so. I think they're probably a lot less rare than we're led to believe, because I certainly have known quite a few people with severe psychopathy, and he is obviously one of them. Although I want to emphasize that not all people with this personality disorder are serial killers, right? And so I guess, that makes him somewhat of an outlier, even among people with that personality disorder. The other thing about him is that he um, was tested and I was a verified genius, and he was a member of Mensa. So how we met was this was the late 70s, and he drove. I remember his stick shift car because I remember, that was when those were popular. I remember him driving his stick shift car. It was like maybe it was like a VW Bug or an Audi or something like that, kind of like a boxy car. And I was walking to the bus stop because I was going to my job at the hospital gift shop, and he just drove by and asked me if I wanted a ride. I said, sure. And so he took me to work that day, dropped me off at the hospital. And I think I had two or three encounters with him altogether. One of them, I was walking down my street and he was outside and he invited me to come in because he saw me again. And I remember his mother was there, and she was kind of odd, to be honest. She was dressed in a house coat, and she saw me, here, this 17-year-old child coming in with, her son. And he had at that point already been arrested for something, um, some sort of sexual assault or something. And so he took me in and he showed me all of the volumes of pictures that he had taken. He was a photographer. He was actually a pretty good photographer. And his pictures were of both men and women. And I guess now probably what he did would have been a crime because he showed me pornography and I was underage. I don't know. Maybe it's not a crime to do that. I don't know. And the men he took pictures of were at various stages of arousal, and some of them, had different anatomy. And that was it. And he took that picture of me on another occasion. So that's kind of all I know about him, other than he prided himself in being intelligent, and we had somewhat intellectual conversations. Don't remember about what.
About how old was he when you met him?
I want to say he was at least in his 30s.
Wow.
He wasn't in his 20s, that's for sure.
Okay. And when did you learn that he was accused of such terrible crimes?
Well, I mean, whose father, I guess a lot of girls' fathers might have said this to them, but my poor father, God bless him, he said to me, and you would get in the car with a serial killer now, wouldn't you? And at the time he said that, he wasn't serious. But then he later found out that this man had been accused of some, crime against girls. So he told me to stay away from him. I don't really know at what point my dad may have found out or heard about it and then told me about it, because I was the sort of fearless child and adventurous child, and he, of course, was always afraid of my safety because of that. And so I don't know. I guess a person can say, well, maybe that's why I've known so many people with psychopathy, because I just sort of a free spirit and curious about the world, and in that style, encountered a lot of them.
Hmm. Okay, so another thing that you told me early on in our friendship was that after your experience with an abuser, not Rodney Alcala, but someone else, that you came to the conclusion that your training as a psychiatrist was deficient. So, how do you compare what you learned about these personality disorders with what you saw in real life?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't thought about that one in a while. What was deficient about the training I had was that I was never presented a coherent theory about why people do what they do. And so absent that coherent theory, people's behavior doesn't make any sense. And so I was taught that that people all have the same motives and the same needs for love and whatnot. And that some people, are criminal offenders, but it's largely related to their upbringing, I guess, was kind of the prevailing theory then. Although I had read Cleckley's Mask of Sanity, I didn't really have a way to reconcile the information in that book with what I saw treating people. Because I didn't, I saw the lying and the manipulation treating people, but there was no explanation for why are people like that.
Mhm.
And one of my mentors used to say, which I guess is in a way true, but it's in a way not true. He pointed to the fact that these personality types are on a continuum with normal.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my mentors used to say, well, we're all a little bit borderline and we're all a little bit sociopathic. That's just not helpful. So I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Well, kind of. Essentially, there was, I guess, there was no real description of this type of behavior outside of criminal justice.
Right, right. And also there was a lack of an appreciation for the fact, like also, let me just say though, the DSM-3 must have been 3R that I was trained under had a definition for antisocial personality disorder that was probably a lot better than even the one we have now, because at least it included deficient parenting was actually part of the diagnosis, but there was no linking, like why would deficient parenting be linked to criminal behavior? There was no explanation for that. Well, I can tell you now why all of those things link, because if you lack if a person lacks the system that allows them to love and care for others, and they are high in social dominance, then they're going to become both a bad parent and a criminal offender, uh, or other, I guess, exploitative lifestyle. If it's not criminal, they're doing other things that exploit other people.
So, what would you say now are the failings of the mental health field in supporting survivors?
I think number one, survivors tell me, is failure to recognize the survival syndrome. In fact, I was at a training today, and I had the privilege of sitting with some social workers that were with the uh, Connecticut Department of Children and Families. And I had a nice conversation with one of them about this. And he recognizes that survivors often appear mentally ill, and more mentally ill than the offending parent.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and also that he recognizes also that survivors do things that make their situation worse.
Mm-hmm.
He spontaneously said that. And so I think by not recognizing the syndrome, even just to say this person is a trauma survivor isn't enough, because there is some people react to this understandably with a sense of injustice having been done to them. And it's that sense of injustice that causes them to do things that are maybe not in their best interest. And so that's that lack of recognition of the syndrome, I'd say, is the number one thing. And then the number two thing is not recognizing the impact of a psychopathic parent on children. That not recognizing parental alienation, not knowing what it is. That's the second thing. And then with those together, there's a tendency to blame the victim for having gotten themselves into this mess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. You've also had a lot of contact with victims. What do you think, Donna?
Well,
Am I missing? What am I leaving out of this?
what I've heard early on, when Love Fraud first started in like 2005, it was just this black hole where nobody even knew that these personality disorders were out there. And what I've heard from a lot of folks is that who have gone for therapy, in fact, we did research on this, was that they go for therapy, that the therapist has no idea what they're talking about and doesn't believe them. So it consequently, the survivor ends up feeling invalidated, or feels like they're, not perceiving things correctly, or they're going crazy, or something like that. So that may have gotten a little better, or at least I think awareness is better over the last 10 years or so. But I'm not sure how much that's gotten into the actual recovery aspect of it. So
yeah, you know what? Let me just comment on what you just said,
okay.
because I think that's the other issue about the not believing the victim.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is this kind of assumption, well, if you're getting a divorce, of course you're going to say bad things about your ex. Well, this week I have interviewed a couple of people that have been party to a divorce, and neither one badmouthed their ex, even though I gave them plenty of opportunity to. So that's just a false belief. And so if someone is saying that their ex had a drinking problem, their ex was abusive, then I think they should be believed, because people don't usually say that if it's not true.
Okay. So what we want to talk about today is a little bit of recovery. You have developed a program that's called Skills for Recovery from Narcissistic Abuse, Gaslighting, and Toxic Stress. But first of all, I have been able to recover, and you have been able to recover. So, how would you define recovery after one of these difficult experiences with a sociopath?
Recovery means having a sense of purpose in your life, um, being able to enjoy things again, and being able to love and trust again.
And what do you think is the key to recovery?
Is there a key to recovery? Oh, I think if you have to pin it on one thing, I think it's acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Acceptance of what has happened. And um, and also that acceptance might require a person to change their worldview. If maybe in the past a person didn't think that evil people existed in this way, then they may have to um, revise their worldview to accept that world includes this group of people that exploit others.
And one of the things we want to point out as far as acceptance is concerned, it doesn't mean that the sociopath's behavior is acceptable. What it means is that whatever happened did happen, and you can't change the past. And so it's coming to terms with the idea that you did have this experience, this awful experience, and that, there are therapists who think, that's the starting point. I mean, once you get to the point, and as you just said, that you accept what happened, then you can start figuring out how to move forward. So,
and also, so let me just say, the reason why acceptance is so important is that once you accept, you can start letting go of all the brainwashing that was done, all of the negative things that person said about you. You can really let them go and say they're not true.
mm-hmm.
They're not true about me. That what that person said was abuse, and there's no truth in it, and they said it as part of their exploitation, and this is a reflection of who they are, and who they are is not someone that I should believe in, right?
Oh
That's
yeah.
what acceptance does. It sets you free to let go of the negativity that was placed in you from this person.
So a lot of people struggle with trying to figure out how they fell in love with a sociopath to begin with, assuming that we're talking about romantic relationships. Of course, there are those who, figure out that their parents are disordered. But as far as an involvement that I hate to say choose, but something that you kind of agree to, how does it happen? How does somebody actually end up in this situation where they're romantically involved with a sociopath?
Okay, so ending up in a situation where you're romantically involved in a sociopath is one thing. Falling in love with them is another thing. And so let's talk about the first thing. Well, you could be an adventurous soul like me, I never had any contact whatsoever with Rodney Alcala other than, he took my picture and showed me his pictures. And so people, a lot of times most of the time are deceived into the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And the person they present themselves to be is not who they are. So the person doesn't willingly enter a relationship with someone like this. They enter a relationship with someone they think they're entering a relationship with, and it's not that person.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm going to just challenge what you said just a little bit. I don't think that the bond that a child of a psychopathic person feels toward that parent is all that much different than a bond that a romantic partner may feel. In the
Okay.
sense that both are biologic. We have to help people understand a love bond is a biologic phenomenon. It means that person has been imprinted on your brain. And so parents probably have more of a chance to imprint on the child's brain than a romantic partner or spouse. But that spouse is imprinted on the brain. That's what that's about. And so to heal and to get yourself out of that, you have to undo that biology.
Okay. So, and are you describing a trauma bond?
Yeah, well, so a trauma bond, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So trauma bonds trauma bonds are formed in the same biologic way that regular bonds are formed, but they're more intense because love bonds, part of it is seeking solace in someone when you feel frightened. Well, this part of your brain doesn't know the difference between fears that are coming from the person you're running to and fears in the outside world. It just knows fear. And so in the presence of fear, those bonds are strengthened. And that's what we mean by a trauma bond.
So, what's the mechanism for somebody to, for a trauma bond to form? You mentioned the fear.
Well, there's fear, and then there is alternating good treatment, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote, and intimacy, and especially sexual intimacy with the romantic partner, um, is what changes that brain chemistry.
Mm-hmm. And
Falling
also,
in love, even under normal circumstances, falling in love is a delusion, right?
yeah, right, right. So, if someone has been traumatized by a relationship, which most of us are or were once we figure out what's going on, how are people affected by trauma in like how they make decisions or what they see?
So trauma affects the the relationship between your emotional system of your brain and your thinking system of your brain, in that your emotional system is overactive and kind of overwhelms the thinking system. And the more fear that a person lives with, the more this is true. So there is altered systems of also meaning. So in this context, a lot of victims adopt the worldview of the perpetrator, and it can often be a pretty warped worldview. See, I'm just running through the criteria in my mind. And then, in addition, there's other physiologic symptoms like being easily startled, having trouble sleeping, being irritable or being depressed. Those are all sequelae of trauma.
Okay. So why then do all these symptoms make it difficult for people to leave a sociopath?
Well, the main symptom that causes difficulty leaving is the idea that the thinking part of the brain is overwhelmed by the emotional brain, and people are brainwashed into the worldview. So it's not, in my experience, it's not uncommon for people to believe falsely that this person was a genius or somehow had extraordinary abilities, and that makes them want to stay in the relationship. But I also want to say that I think victims are equally trapped by our social structures, that psychopathic individuals are very skilled at exploiting all of our social structures to hang on to the people that they're preying on. So they'll use the family court system and the marriage bond. They'll use the child custody system. They'll use whatever system that's there, the social structure. If it's a family going to a church, they'll use the other members of the church. They'll use the family. They'll use the community. And so victims are trapped by that as much as they're trapped by their own minds. And so if you consider that, I think it's easier for the average person to understand why it would be so hard to leave. Really, the person is trapped. And in some cases, if you're protecting young children who are too young to speak for themselves, I think it can be a very difficult decision of whether or not to stay in that relationship, because you can't rely on society to protect your children from the psychopathic parent. And your children might be worse off if they have to spend time alone with that person. Mm-hmm. So people are trapped because of our ignorance of this condition. And that ignorance leaves us all guilty of setting up situations where people are victimized.
Okay, so now I'd like to talk about the program that you developed. Modified, you can explain. It's called Skills for Narcissistic Abuse, Skills for Recovery from Narcissistic Abuse, Gaslighting, and Toxic Stress. So you've told me that it's based on dialectical behavioral therapy. So can you explain that a little bit?
All right. So dialectical behavioral therapy was developed by a psychologist, Marsha Linehan, who herself, if you read her autobiography, I recommend people read it. It's good. You'll see that she dealt with this in her own family. There was a certain amount of narcissistic abuse in her own family. She doesn't call it that, but she describes it. And she set out and did actual research on what helped people who were chronically suicidal, and came up with a package of 4 sets of skills that are most helpful, and they were helpful to her. And so I think we can have confidence in that this is a treatment that was developed by someone who had suffered narcissistic abuse, you want to call it that, and that's why it's effective. And so what is it about the treatment? So the 4 pieces of the treatment, the first one, the first component is mindfulness. And mindfulness addresses 2 aspects of the syndrome that we're talking about. Mindfulness helps a person calm that emotional brain down, and mindfulness helps strengthen the thinking brain. So mindfulness will help immunize people from the gaslighting and help them to see their abuser for who they are and not the constructed individual that's in their mind. So that's mindfulness. And then in addition to mindfulness, there's also distress tolerance, which gets directly at this idea of emotional over arousal that overwhelms the thinking mind. So it teaches ways to calm yourself that are effective, and the ways to keep yourself calm. And then there's an emotion regulation component that teaches us about emotions and the purpose of emotions. And then there's an interpersonal effectiveness component that helps people know how to deal effectively with all other people, including disordered people. So what I think about the interpersonal effectiveness skills is that, you know, they're not a guarantee. If you use the skills that you're going to win over someone who's got psychopathy, but what they will do is they'll make you look good to other people. And so sometimes winning means looking good to everyone else, because over time you can build allies. I think it's helpful if people stop doing and saying things that are going to make their situation worse, and the interpersonal effectiveness skills are good for that.
And what you've done is you're presenting all these skills tailored specifically to people who have suffered narcissistic abuse, correct?
Right. And so I also in the series explain various aspects of disordered people and relate those aspects to the skills.
And skills, these are things that people essentially learn how to cope with life. I mean, it doesn't necessarily replace their therapist or anything, but it's an added thing that they can use to get through different situations as they arise.
Right. And so I think one big complaint people have about therapy is they don't learn enough coping skills in the therapy. The therapist will talk to you, but maybe the therapist doesn't know the skills. And so this fills that vacuum of skills to use to get yourself out of this mess. And your therapist can support your skills use if they know what skills you're trying to use.
So one of the points that you make in talking about this is the survival principles. So can you describe them, please? The 2 survival principles.
Oh, you're going to have to remind me because I don't remember.
Well, the first one is not doing anything to make your situation worse, which is essentially you just said. And then the other one was to work a little bit every day towards health.
Yeah. So this is how you heal over time. Stop doing things that make your situation worse and do a little something every day to move your recovery forward.
Okay. So, if you want to add anything right now, and then I'll look and see the questions that we have from our
Oh,
folks.
wow, that's great. We have questions. Oh, that's
Yes, we
exciting.
do. So,
Um,
anything you want to add about the program, and then I'll go to the questions.
yeah, no, I think I summarized it pretty well. Yeah, I think
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
people can, there's a video that our first introductory video about the mindfulness component people can watch to learn more about it too.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question from Scorpio Bird. It says, is it possible to recover with the person still in your life? My sociopath is my dad, and I can't seem to shake him from my life. He won't let go, keeps calling and calling.
Yes, I think that the combination of the mindfulness skills and the emotion regulation skills plus the interpersonal effectiveness skills can help a person navigate that. Because I think for the sons and daughters of disordered individuals, mindfulness helps them to see the difference between the parent that exists inside them that their mind has constructed, that is this good parent. So we all have living in us, and most people who are sort of psychologically healthy have living in them some version of their good parent. But it's not real. It's a construct of your mind. And it's like, so too, if the psychopath is your lover, it's the same thing. You have this constructed individual living inside your head. And mindfulness can help you know the difference between that image inside your head and what you're really seeing in reality. So the combination of really knowing the reality of what you're dealing with and using the interpersonal effectiveness skills, I think would help a person to go forward, even having to have that person in their life if that was their situation. And that is a lot of people's situation for a lot of reasons. Um, could be an ex-partner too, is still in their life because they're co-parenting.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we have to be able to go on. These people are everywhere, right? So we have to be able to uh, live in the world with them.
Okay. So, the other comments were all essentially our folks supporting each other in the chat, so that's great.
Good.
I'm glad that that happened. So I just want to mention again that the program is called Skills for Recovery from Narcissistic Abuse, Gaslighting, and Toxic Stress. And it's now October of 2025, and we're running a special, a 20% off for the program. There's coupons and more information in the window below this, but there are actually 6 parts to this webinar series. The first part, if you want to check it out, is free, and you can sign up for that. And then there's 5 more parts that go over the elements that Dr. Leedom talked about. And then the last one is on post-traumatic growth and spirituality. So can you comment on that a little bit? I mean, there is light at the end of the tunnel, I guess you could say, for
Right.
these students.
And I just want to um I had this idea, Donna. Maybe I shouldn't say it on YouTube, but I'll tell you in front of everyone. You have a fabulous book, Senior Sociopaths. I think another fabulous book will be Senior Survivors, because there are an awful lot of senior survivors. And I want to just lift them up right now and say, maybe you had children with someone who was disordered and all of your children are affected. And so the later half of your life isn't what you thought it would be, and the earlier half of your life wasn't what you thought it would be either. And there are people that even in the midst of that can find meaning and purpose and love and healing. And that's where the spirituality comes in, because the longer you have shared life with an individual like this, the more damage, if you can call it damage, the more real damage that they've done to you. And so that just means that you have to make meaning of that and find strategies for going forward, and revise maybe beliefs that you had about what you needed to be happy. So that's where spirituality comes in. That understanding of what do you really need and why are you really here.
Mm-hmm.
And experiences cause us to ask those questions.
Right. Well, I just want to reaffirm for everybody that recovery is possible. It does require a bit of effort, and Dr. Leedom has provided these great tools that you can use to help you through your recovery and then also in day-to-day life. So I want to thank you for your explanation today. This is great. And maybe I'll write another book about senior survivors.
Well, maybe we'll hear a lot. If you're a senior survivor out there, share your story.
Yes.
I lift you up.
Okay. All right, everybody. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And once again, this is Love Fraud Live, and we'll see you next week for the next episode of Love Fraud Live. Good night, everybody.